You know that feeling when you're in a relationship and the lines just get completely blurred, where your whole purpose seems to be about meeting someone else's needs? Well, that feeling has a name: codependency. It's a term we hear all the time, but what does it really mean? Let's break it down together.
So here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. First, we'll nail down what codependency actually is. Then, we'll talk about how to recognize the patterns. After that, we'll dig into where it all begins, walk through the path to healing, and finally, look at what it takes to build truly healthy connections. All right, first things first, let's get a really clear, solid definition. What are we actually talking about when we use the word codependency? This question, right here, this really gets to the heart of it. It's that sinking feeling of losing yourself, where your own happiness, your own sense of worth, just becomes completely tangled up with someone else's.
Okay, so at its core, codependency is this dysfunctional pattern where you're excessively relying on someone else for your emotional needs, and usually it's at your own expense. But here's the most crucial point. This isn't a clinical diagnosis. It's not a permanent part of your personality. It's a pattern of learned behaviors. And you know what that means? It means it can be changed. Now, you might also hear the word enmeshment thrown around, and it's important to know the difference. Enmeshment is when boundaries are so blurry that you can't tell where one person ends and another begins. Think of a family where nobody has any privacy or sense of self. That environment, that enmeshment can become the perfect fertile ground where codependency, that excessive reliance, can really take root. And before we go any further, let's just bust some common myths. First off, no, it's not just about relationships with addiction. It is not a permanent part of who you are, and it is absolutely not a sign of weakness. Actually, it often develops as a really smart coping mechanism in tough situations. And most importantly, it can for sure be overcome. Okay, so we've got the definition down. But what does codependency actually look like day to day? Let's dive into the common science. On the inside, it often starts with low self-esteem. That can lead you to define yourself almost completely by your role as a partner, a parent, or a friend. Your emotions start to feel like they depend on the other person's mood. And underneath it all, there's this deep, nagging fear of being abandoned. Just take a second and sit with this question. It's a really powerful way to check in with yourself. If the honest answer is yes, well, that's a pretty strong sign that your identity might be just a little too tangled up with someone else's.
And all those internal feelings, they lead to specific behaviors. You might find you're always playing the rescuer, constantly drawn to people who need fixing. This can look like staying in a relationship long after it's turned unhealthy, finding it almost impossible to say no, and even trying to manage or control other people's lives just to feel a little more secure yourself. So the big question is, where does this stuff even come from? Because nobody is just born this way. To really get it, we've got to look back at the roots. The roots of codependency are almost always found in our early family life. Environments where communication was terrible, emotional support was basically non-existent, or where kids had to take on these really rigid roles, like being the caretaker for a parent. Those early experiences, they really do set the stage for our relationships later on. This also ties directly into attachment theory. So someone with an anxious attachment style, which can come from inconsistent care, might develop a deep fear of abandonment. And on the flip side, someone with an avoidance style might fear intimacy. When those two styles get together, you often see that classic and often painful push-pull dynamic in a relationship. And of course, we have to talk about trauma. When a child goes through emotional neglect or abuse, the world feels incredibly unsafe. So developing codependent behaviors, like becoming super aware of everyone else's needs to keep the peace, that can be a survival strategy. It's a coping mechanism you learn as a kid just to feel secure. Now, I know this can all sound pretty heavy, but here's the most important part of this whole conversation. Healing is absolutely possible. So let's talk about the path forward. The very first, most critical step is self-awareness. It's just about pausing and learning to untangle your feelings from someone else's. It's about starting to ask, wait, what do I need? What do I feel right now? And realizing that your needs are valid, they're separate, and they're important. You can actually break this journey down into clear, doable steps. So once you've got that foundation of self-awareness, the real work begins. It's about practicing self-care, learning how to set firm but kind boundaries, getting better at communicating your needs, and this is a big one, seeking support. You really don't have to do this all alone. I really want to zoom in on self-compassion for a second, because it's like the perfect antidote to that harsh inner critic that so often comes with codependency. It's about changing that voice in your head, offering yourself the same grace and understanding you give so freely to everyone else. And here are some real, tangible places you can find that support. Therapists who specialize in this stuff can give you personalized guidance. Groups like Codependence Anonymous or CODA offer a whole community of people who just get it. The point is, help is out there. So what's the end goal here? What does a healthy relationship even look like on the other side of this journey? Well, it's about moving away from codependency and towards something called independence. This right here is the essential shift we're aiming for. Think of it like this. Codependency suffocates, but independence empowers. In a healthy, independent relationship, you have two whole independent people choosing to rely on each other for mutual support. You grow together, but you don't lose yourself in the process. So embracing this healthier model means you have to actively cultivate your own sense of self. It's about rediscovering what you love, what your passions are, completely outside of any relationship. It's all built on open communication, mutual support, and, really importantly, forgiving yourself for the patterns of the past. And it's so important to know that rebuilding an existing relationship is possible. It absolutely takes work, don't get me wrong. It requires a lot of open conversation, rebuilding trust through consistent actions over time, and consciously replacing that need for control with genuine respect. So, we'll leave you with this final thought. Look, this doesn't have to be some monumental shift that happens overnight. Healing starts with a single step. So the question is, what is one small, clear boundary you can set today, just for yourself, to start reclaiming a little piece of your own space, your own time, and your own identity?